My guest today is filmmaker Olly Ginelli, and Olly's first career in front of the camera, you're not going to believe this, as a professional break dancer. But during which time he learned piano for 10 years in order to surprise his dad live on BBC One with a performance for his 70th birthday. But also Olly's first ever feature script, which was only in its third draft, was selected in the top 1% of over 4,000 submissions by the BBC Voices program in 2023, confirming him as one of the UK's top up and coming screenwriters. Now, he has a brand new, compelling, and tension driven short film, The Long Spring, and it's about a brother and sister trapped in the back of a lorry with dozens of refugees, and the brother optimistically clings to hope as he confronts his terrified younger sister. So, for the rest of the story, let's welcome filmmaker Olly Ginelli and his short film, The Long Spring, to the show. Welcome, Olly.
Hey Ward, thank you for having me. It's a real pleasure.
You bet. Okay, I have to ask, how did you become a professional breakdancer back in the day?
You can thank Run DMC if you remember that song. It's like that, and that's the way it is. However old I was back then, I was talking single digits. I would just fly off the walls, and my mum could see that I had a lot of energy as a kid. So she said, "Well, why don't you try and learn properly?" And I did. I started learning at 15. And I never thought it would be a profession. I'm generally one of those, I guess, like a classic creative. Like I just when I find something that I like, I just run at that and I just kind of obsess over it. And then for my first ever job, a friend of me said, "Do you want to come to perform in a hotel reception? I'll give you 20 quid, like $20." And I was like, 20 quid, no way. And that was the beginning of it. Yeah, yeah. So I just I didn't know that people would pay you to dance, so that was it.
That is that is just so cool. And then you spent 10 years learning the piano.
Yeah, yeah, that one again wasn't meant to be like a film which was going to become a part of my portfolio or anything I thought was going to be part of me being a director. The only reason I filmed it over those 10 years was to show my dad, hey, look, this is me learning to prove you wrong. And thank God I did that, because when lockdown hit, that was what I sent to the BBC in order for them to say, well, look, do you want to do this live on TV?
What, so is that the film that was also featured on the Today Show that ended up with over 30 million views?
That's the one. Yeah, yeah. And the Today Show just happened organically as well. Someone sent that to me, and I was like, "I'm on TV in America. What's going on?" So it went truly viral.
Wow. Well, I just love hearing some of the background stories of all of the filmmakers to where they started and then for some weird reason they end up in film. But now you have this brand new short film that is compelling, it's emotional, it's powerful, it's tension driven. So the long spring, well, it really places the audience inside one of the most desperate and dangerous journeys imaginable. Where did the story come from?
The story was inspired by my time volunteering in the refugee camps, and I just went there again, like not thinking that this was going to inspire a script or anything to do with my film career. I was just quite passionate about activism at the time. ISIS were taking over the Middle East, and lots of people were fleeing into Europe. So me and some friends just went there and volunteered, and I met tons of people from every walk of life in the camps. But one of the things that was the most shocking to me, Ward, was while I was there, I saw gang activity in the camps. So they put up all of these like cheap wooden huts just for people to have shelter. But then sometimes overnight, like a padlock would appear on the hut, and the gangs were running a racket and charging people like excess money, like thousands, to stay in these little huts. And you realize that these gangs are actually abusing some of the most vulnerable people on earth. And I just didn't think criminality could go that low. I was just so shocked. And that's why I kind of wanted to make a film about it, because I then realized just how much human trafficking is taking place within the refugee crisis.
Well, if these gangs were taking over the refugee camps, why wasn't the government involved in taking care of those camps when it's on their own soil?
I mean, yeah, your guess is as good as mine. The only thing that I could point to was that as you were entering the camps, there were like armed French police with rifles, but they had a policy of non-intervention. So I guess they were there just to sort of be a presence and to sort of intimidate people. But things would go wrong in the camps. Like people would have fights, and I remember one day like some kids were throwing stones at people, and the police just wouldn't get involved. So who knows? It's a bad policy to just be so hands off because you let it flourish. It's like an untethered society.
Yeah, yeah, they let it go on and then they wonder why it gets worse. But in this film, why did you choose to tell it from the inside of the confines of a lorry?
It's a good question. The sort of economic and like cold truth answer is that it was one location which was contained, and from a short film perspective, we're resource thin, so I thought, right, that's what's going to make this easier to make. I also thought it was interesting creatively that I hadn't seen that before. I've never seen a film depicting refugees in the back of a lorry. We've all seen like films like Lock, which have taken place inside of a vehicle, but nothing like this. And I also would I thought I could I thought I'd gotten onto a hack way to make this film so cheap that if it's dark in the back of these lorries, we wouldn't even need lights. So I thought, right, we can like get rid of the lighting budget. But that wasn't true at all because, of course, as soon as you start speaking to a DP, we're like, well, they're going to be on a motorway. There'll be lampposts over top. So in fact, it costs more lights. But that's just the beauty of filmmaking.
Well, one of the most unsettling aspects of this film is that these refugees have no choice but to place their lives in the hands of smugglers, people they know nothing about, which you kind of alluded to from those that were in the refugee camps. And but as the story unfolds, the possibility that these smugglers may actually be traffickers creates an entirely new layer of fear in this film.
Completely. That's something I found from the research as well, and I've done quite a lot of press around the film, and I think a lot of people know that a big part of the inspiration was that one of the refugees I met in the camp made it into the UK in the back of a lorry, and he successfully claimed asylum, which is quite rare, especially these days with the government policies. And he told me what it was like in the back of those lorries, and he luckily, I don't know if he used smugglers or not, but he didn't get caught up in that system, but many people did, and you just kind of stop to think. I mean, I must have met 200 or 300 people over my 2 weeks in the camps, and you kind of stop to think, where are they now? Like, what's happened to them? Are they in the UK in enslaved?
Well, with refugees, most of the public thinks that they're poor leaving a country, but did you ever come across any of them that were highly educated?
Loads. And it's funny actually, like now that we're going on to make The Long Spring as a feature film and or a TV series, that's something I'm really going to dig into because I was meeting architects there who were on six-figure salaries, like people who had a swimming pool back in their home in Syria or wherever they come from. So they were in no rush to come to England or Europe until your country gets destroyed and they have no choice.
I have seen stories and even watched a feature film a few months ago that refugees, uh, they're architects, they're doctors, they're dentists, they're professors, and most people, the public, views them as poor, trying to find a better life. But regardless what your background is, everybody wants to find that better life. And this is what makes this, I mean, your film, of course, it falls into that category of really being an important social impact film. Has this film been shown to any government agencies?
Yeah, that's a really good question. We recently partnered with Choose Love, who are obviously one of the biggest refugee charities on the planet. And we are in discussions with them about touring. So we did a screening of 4 short films all about the refugee experience. Obviously, The Long Spring was one of them, and it got such a good reception that we're talking about touring it, but specifically taking it to places where there's like the biggest like sort of voter groups for like the some of the right wing parties in the UK, which they're called Reform, and where they're the sentiment is the biggest in terms of anti-immigration, and we thought about we need to get out of our echo chambers. It's all good, all us liberals sitting around and agreeing like that it's terrible, but as you said, like a lot of these people are architects, they're doctors, they're university graduated, and they're good people. And I think being able to have a conversation with people and show them these stories will help them to maybe change their minds on the refugee crisis, but also to listen as well, not just to try and convince someone that we're correct. Like, I think it's important for us to learn like why people have an anti-immigration stance and how it is affecting their life, because there's 2 sides to every coin and there's no silver bullet answer.
Yeah, that's for sure. Now, I know you have two lead characters. You have the brother, Aaron, you have the sister, Kika. And of course, Aaron is continually reassuring his younger sister that everything's going to be okay. But as the journey in the film becomes more desperate, his confidence starts to unravel. So, what interested you about exploring the emotional burden of someone trying to remain strong, but when they're quietly losing hope themselves?
Another really great question. Thank you. I guess I tried to draw on as much of what I knew of the situation from the refugees that I'd lived with, had spoken to, the charities that I've spoken to, because I did extensive research. The script that you mentioned that got into the top 1% of BBC's writers' room, I had spent a year both working with refugee charities, human slavery charities, and I spoke to the chief of Essex Police. So I was trying to draw on as much real evidence as possible. But then in terms of the characters, like every story is a human story, and they always say to you, write the truth. So I tried to do that, and I tried to put as much of myself in Aaron as possible. Of like as I when I was younger, I was kind of I wouldn't say a hopeless optimist, but I was just extremely optimistic about all things, and like full of bravado and a little bit cocky and cheeky. And I think the journey of going from sorry, it's my phone. I should definitely put that on silent. Let's do that again. So to pick up from where I left off, the I feel like the journey into manhood, and I guess just more generically adulthood, is having those sharp edges rounded off by life and just realizing that bravado isn't always going to get you through. And I wanted to really show the male experience of learning that like accountability and vulnerability is actually what makes a man, not being like sort of brave in an empty way or just thinking that you've got control of a situation that you don't. And that's why I put him up against a man who did have lived experience and who was trying to tell him, look, relax, calm down, like this is dangerous. So yeah, that was it. That I just thought that was the best way to tell that story.
Well, what struck me most about The Long Spring is is the extraordinary realism of this film. It never feels like the actors are performing scenes. It feels as though we've been placed inside that truck. I mean, was placing the audience in that harsh reality your goal from the very beginning?
Thank you for that compliment. I have to give credit to the cast for really bringing that bringing the performances to life in that way. Yeah, we made a decision to try and give you the experience of being in the back of the lorry. We did in the end up putting some sort of exterior shots in just to sort of help like flesh out the world a bit because it needed that. But for example, like one of the things we did to try and help create that realism is the refugee that I met who made it to the UK in the back of a lorry. We paid for him to come to set and to actually speak to the actors. He spoke to my 2 lead cast, and their jaws were on the floor because the thing is, Ward, a lot of the true life stories that I was told by that refugee, a lot of them I couldn't put into the film because they would have sounded like Hollywood, like traditional like action theater with like something that Jason Statham might be in. Like, I'm talking about. He told me one story of a refugee who jumped from a bridge onto a lorry, like a moving lorry at like 80 miles an hour, and then cut his way into the lorry. And you think that's life or death. If you miss that, you're dead, or if you could land and then roll off. But if I put that in a film, if you saw a refugee jumping off a bridge, you'd be like, "Ah, this is
Oh
unrealistic."
yeah,
But
it would just
unfortunately,
be
it's
like a Hollywood movie again.
right. So if anything, we had to dial the reality back, and it wasn't life imitating art. It was kind of trying to not imitate it so much, just so that people would buy into it more. Also, we probably couldn't afford to have that stunt.
Yeah, you
Just
know,
being on, even if I wanted to.
there's a scene in the back of the lorry that really drives this realism home, and it's when Kika needed to use the bath. She needed to relieve herself, and all there was a
Mm.
bucket. How important was it to show that scene?
That scene is one of the direct scenes that Sadi, the refugee, told me about, and he just said just how difficult it was, like having women having to use the toilet in the back of a lorry. And for us Westerners, we just don't think about those things. Like you hear about people coming here on boats and in lorries, but you just think if someone's in the back of a lorry for 2 days, it's like 12, it's like sometimes up to 40, 50 people. You can only imagine. So that was really important, and I think that was the sort of the pinnacle of distress that I focused on, rather than the things like people jumping onto lorries from bridges, because I felt a responsibility as a filmmaker to show the experience at its worst, but in the contained version of its worst.
Well, then, as a director, how did you maintain the constant sense of tension while allowing audiences to connect emotionally with the people trapped inside?
Oh, that's a really good question. The the key was just constantly asking ourselves if the performances were right, um, emotionally, like how they were emotionally charged. We done a lot of rehearsal so that once we got to set, we kind of hit the ground running, and also like there were a few things which kind of helped us in the practicality. For example, that lorry that we shot in is called a curtain side truck. So it's got like it's canvas on the side which you can draw across. And we thought, this is going to be brilliant because we can draw it across, we can light into the truck, we can do bigger camera moves, and like the crew can have space and everyone can have eyes on, almost like we've set up a theater stage. You get onto set, the curtain doesn't pull, and then you are actually just like stuck going into the back of the lorry, having to lift up the shutters up and down. And for sound, we had to have it closed. So every take, shutters go up, we give our notes, the shutters go down, and then we do the take. So I think that really helped the actors because they're only in there with all their other cast, and then like me, the DP, and the first AC, and the sound person. That's it. Very, very skeleton. Whereas had we had all 25 crew stood there, like gaffer, like, producer, people at a video monitor, you're suddenly not in that lorry anymore. So I think that practicality actually paid off.
Yeah, when there was a camera shot that shows the back door to the lorry, and I noticed the cloth side of the lorry, and that thought entered my mind. I thought, I'm surprised they didn't open that up, but you wouldn't have the audience wouldn't have the feeling of containment. It had to be done like you did it. Everybody's in there, you close the back door, you have three people in there responsible for filming. And because at the same time, I mean, what time of year did you film? Because, just by looking, it looked like everybody was sweating.
Yeah, well, the lorry was in a studio, so we also added the sweat as well. I can't remember if it got so hot that we were sweating, but it was definitely warm enough. So it was a 3 day shoot. The first 2 days were in a studio, because we realized very quickly that you can't shoot with actors and heavy camera equipment with a lorry that's actually driving around for obvious health and safety purposes, but then insurance and the rest of it. And even if you were going to do it, you'd have to do it on private land where it was extra safe, and you can only drive at 10 miles an hour. So we're like, right, forget this. So yeah, we were shooting inside of a studio, and then we went and shot on location for when they do leave. So I guess for the actors, like we gave them as much to work with as possible, and yeah, I guess the heat would have helped that as well.
Yeah, because it looks so real that the audience would never know that you filmed it inside of a studio, because I was even looking at the ceiling of the lorry, because usually the ceilings in those lorries, they're a bit of transparent, they're opaque. So, light comes and goes in and out, which you captured very, very well, because it gives the audience the sense that this thing is driving down the road. You can hear it, you can see people moving around. So the realism is just spot on in the storytelling. But tell me about the casting process, and then what qualities were you looking for in finding the right people who could bring all the characters to life?
The casting process was very difficult. I have to give huge props to Aisling Knight, who was our casting director. When you think about a short film, like generally, like you're always trying to get the best cast possible, and you don't always have that much money. If you imagine adding on top of the fact that you don't have much money and resource or reputation to try and get the best actors, we not only had to find two leads who looked like brother and sister, they both needed to be fluent in French. And then what we needed to do with Warren, who played Aaron, he then had to learn to speak in an Ivorian accent because he generally speaks in like European French. So like we really stacked it high, and then I don't even speak French, so you throw that all of that in the mix. I had to bring a language translator on board, and she was also like accent coaching. So it was really tough, but I think what the best bit of advice I ever heard was, if you cast right, then you don't really need to direct your actors. And that's so true. And we just spent a long time in casting, and like I said, did lots of workshops. And I tend to do workshops rather than auditions. So rather than just sit behind a table and expect an actor to be great for 5 minutes while they're on the spot, that doesn't really replicate a film set. And like you're not getting into the weeds of what it's like to work together and communicate together. So like when I audition my actors, like we'll sit down for 4 hours and run a scene, because then you really know if it's going to work. So yeah, I think I don't know if other people do that, but I like to do that. Yeah, to be a bit more thorough.
Well, it completely paid off. Now, why did you choose French language instead of going a UK route?
I wish I had a more intellectual answer for this, other than the fact other than the fact that I just like the sound of French. I mean, it had to work logistically, and obviously, like picking characters who are from West Africa and they speak French there. That was the sort of choice. I kept it open though, Ward, as well, because like they could have been from a Middle Eastern background and been speaking Arabic, so we were casting in that direction, but I wrote in French. We found the French actors. So I was like, great. Yeah, let's run with it.
Now, I know that there's the scene when the lorry finally stops, and then the smugglers bring everybody outside. That was a very scary scene, especially for the women.
Of course. Yeah, it's something which I'm kind of pointing to the feature film in that moment. And when we make the Long Spring feature film, it's going to really focus on the human slavery that takes place. It's called forced labor. And most films like Taken or Sound of Freedom, they explore the sexual exploitation of human slavery. But what most people don't know, and what most of Hollywood and most TV series have ignored, is the fact that like 73% of slaves, as I last checked the statistics, are working in construction, in nail bars, in hotels. In the UK recently, I think like six different McDonald's chains got caught with human slaves working in there. It's like McDonald's of all places, like it's just like huge chains like that like can't even catch this issue. And year on year, slavery has been getting worse and worse. So that final scene when they're splitting up the men and the women, obviously we know what generally tends to happen with the women, but the feature film will be showing what happens like on the other side, because like the women aren't always just sent to sexual exploitation. It's like I say, they end up in nail bars and domestic servitude, etc. So yeah, it's a really disgusting and grubby side of that criminal world, and yeah, we need to expose it, I guess.
Because it was when you look at Aaron, you see the concern, Kika is just completely scared out of her mind because they're at the tail end of that line. So they see what's going on. And the audience is already thinking of sexual exploitation of this and not knowing that men and women are separated for other reasons besides sex trafficking. But the fear is real because the women didn't know. They had no idea what was going to happen to them or where they were going. I mean, some of them may ended up being serving at McDonald's or working in a hotel. And but when that happens, are they enslaved by the smugglers or have they put a price on them to say this is what's going to cost you to get out of this?
Exactly. That is, it goes a number of different ways. A lot of the time, the gangs might be selling them to other gangs, or they might be enslaving them themselves. Because what they do is when they're in the country where they're enslaved, the people who own the slaves, they will take control of their bank account, and then put them through the job interview process. So like the person is literally at the threat of death or the threat of murder of their family, sitting in an interview, and interviewing for a job as you would normally. And I guess this is how people end up in McDonald's. But then when they get paid, if they're working at McDonald's, it's probably got to be minimum wage. The gang just collects that minimum wage. But when you do the maths on it, if you have 30 people working for minimum wage, I think it adds up to about £750,000 a year, which is a lot of money, and they'll have all of these people in like a two-bedroom house. So you can see why it's big business, and as you can see on the stats in the film, they estimate the people trafficking business to be worth $236 billion a year. That's profits every year that they estimate, and just like I think that's why I want this film to shine a light on this situation, because most of the criminal funding that goes to police and enforcement agencies goes to capturing drugs. But no one's trying to tackle this human slavery issue. And especially at the moment, both in America and in Europe, there's a very heated debate about immigration. But I think what a lot of people don't realize, especially the people who are on the right and might be anti-immigration, is like, if you want to cut back on immigration, let's fight this human slavery thing, because we can all agree on that. We can all agree that's terrible, and it's rare to find something where we do all agree. So hopefully this helps to contribute to that in whatever small way. And then when we make the feature film, an even bigger way, and the same with the TV series.
Well, I know that The Long Spring has already earned BAFTA qualification for 2027 and the BIFA qualification for 2026. That's pretty an extraordinary achievement already for any filmmaker. So, what does that recognition actually mean to you personally, considering that the humanitarian message is the heart of the film?
It means the world to me, Ward. I never ever expected this film to get BAFTA qualified. You kind of just don't really want to put those things in your head. You make the film the best you can, and you hope it's going to do really well. So obviously, for me personally, I was like over the moon, and for the entire team. But the message getting out there is, of course, like the number one, the reason why we're all so happy about that, and this partnership with Choose Love as well. And as you mentioned before our call, like these sorts of films tend to do well in festivals, because I think the sort of festival community and the awards community always want to shine a light on important stories which might not get mainstream draw. But you only have to look at Sound of Freedom, which beat Mission Impossible at the box office. An indie film beat Tom Cruise. Like, that just should never ever happen, but it did. And if we can replicate any level of that success, it would be great for the recognition of this issue.
The thing about The Long Spring, though, your cinematography, I mean, from beginning to end of this film, it looks like a feature film.
That's really sweet of you to say. I'm almost reluctant to say my DP's name because he's like my little secret. I don't want any directors to get their hands on him, but it's Michael Kinsella Perks. He's incredible. He's one of the most passionate, dedicated, creative DPs that I've ever met in my entire career. I hope to hold on to him for the rest of my days. But I know once he gets discovered, it's just going to be a firework display. And you know, as you've said, so all credit to Mikey for that. Yeah, he did an incredible job.
You know, because the filming is done in the back of a lorry, so you're going to have diminished lighting for the actual effect and to make it real. Was there a particular color palette that you actually used in post?
Yeah, the it's funny actually because the original color palette I suggested to my colorist, he ignored. Yeah, and but it wasn't like, I mean, to give myself some credit, it wasn't like a terrible idea. I wasn't saying make it all, you know, yellow or sepia or something. We kind of had similar ideas, but again, to like big props to Fraser and OK Studio who helped me out, and that, like, you know, I was a part of one of their programs which they run, and they help a lot of filmmakers out in giving out free posts in their competitions. Um, yeah, Fraser's idea was to sort of push more blue tones into the blacks. But also, it's just, you know, coloring is just a dark art. It's just when you work with a good colorist, you kind of know what looks good, but how they get there is it's fascinating. And again, really can't take much credit because he took it in a new direction. And as soon as I saw it, I was like, that's it. And then we just ran with it. Also, he fixed a lot of things for us as well, like as any great colorist does, because where you're shooting in the back of a lorry, you can't always get a light in for an actor's face in those tight spaces. So like, you know, he would lift things up with incredible masking that you can't see, but like we know that it's there.
So you went with a slightly cooler tone.
No, my colorist did. So my colorist put this sort of like the cooler tones into the like the lower ends of the colors. I can't remember exactly what mine was. I think we were leaning more green. We wanted it to look a bit more like sort of grimy. But the cooler tone just worked way better. Also, where it was a blue truck as well, I think he was leaning into that because all that blue light was bouncing off the sides.
Well, yeah, because of the side of the lorry was the blue fabric, right?
Exactly, yeah.
Yeah, yeah, because that makes sense because of the fact is you're inside of a lorry where there's technically no sunshine, and the audience is feeling that they're traveling at night most of the time. And even when that one scene where the truck stopped, it was the other refugee telling Aaron, don't worry." They're probably taking a sleep break. So don't be worrying that we're sitting here for an hour or two because probably they have to take the break because they don't want to draw attention to themselves by any authorities by continuing to drive possibly past their allotted time. Would that be correct?
It's funny actually. The way I scripted that was that your interpretation could exactly be right. Like the lorry drivers could be asleep. What NASA was saying to Aaron at that time is like we're probably going to be here for a couple of days. Like we're going to we'll sleep here for a couple more nights. But that's the beauty of the film. I've heard a lot of different interpretations where you've got a group of people who are communicating to each other in their second language, and that was one of the things I discovered in the camps was that you've got all these people who are going through the exact same experience, but they can't communicate to each other perfectly, and they don't always agree. That was the main thing I learned in the camps, and that I was surprised by. You kind of, in your mind, someone who's never gone through a refugee crisis, you'd think, oh, well, we're all in the same boat, so let's band together and work through this. But that's just not the case. Like, humanity doesn't work that way. And when you're in the camps, there's a lot of arguments, there's a lot of fighting, there's a lot of cultural divides, and I think in dire straits, people hold on to those cultural differences, and I guess it gets down to real sort of primal instincts where I'm going to look after me and my family, and that's all that matters. So yeah, that's kind of what I was leaning into with that. And again, like, it's not like your interpretation's wrong because it's meant to be confusing, and no one's sure what's going on.
Well, all I can say is you literally nailed this story perfectly. And so I can see why it's already BAFTA qualified and even BIFA qualified. Now, I understand that you were selected for the BBC Writers' Room.
Yeah, yeah.
So, what does that opportunity lead to?
It's helped open a lot of doors, to be honest, Ward. It was the, like I said, it's the first script I ever wrote, and in its third draft, I kind of submitted it just like, well, the deadline's here, I won't be able to get another draft done. And then I guess the main thing that did for me was just give me the confidence that I can write. And I think even though it sounds hard to, I mean, I can't believe it. Like, the fact that it was in my third draft and it became one of the best scripts in the country, but it did gratify all of the pay, like the toil that I put in terms of I would just listen to podcasts on screenwriting relentlessly. I've read every single screenwriting book there is. Like, instead of scrolling on Instagram, I watched YouTube video essays about films, and that just, it made me realize that hard work can pay off, because I don't believe I'm a talented filmmaker. I'm not like Scorsese or Nolan. I didn't grow up gobbling up films. I was a dancer. I was out on the streets. So I kind of, that partly drove me to want to study so hard. But then, yeah, the immediate sort of career effect is that I'm getting in the doors with some really exciting production companies. I'm meeting the fourth financier that we've spoken to so far this coming Tuesday. And yeah, I might be signing with an agency, but I've spoken to three different agents about signing with them. So yeah, that's really helped put the burners on my career. You've got the top 1%, and then the long spring, the short has performed really well. So I couldn't have asked for more.
Well, I understand that there's interest from Netflix and Inside MP for expanding The Long Spring into a television series. So, if that opportunity becomes a reality, what stories remain untold that you'd like to explore?
I'm glad you've asked. It's funny because we're not at a stage where it's like NDA or anything like that, but hopefully we will get there. But for now, I can give you the scoop on what I'm planning, and who knows where it'll end up once we go through the development process. But um, the journey of the long spring, which is in the back of the lorry, that's a part of the entire trafficking journey. But if we make the long spring TV series, you're going to get to see the trafficking journey from the very beginning, which is learning how people become traffickers, because a lot of the time people in the gangs are tricked themselves into becoming gang members and becoming traffickers themselves. So the manipulation knows no bounds. And we see from start to finish, from episode 1 to episode 8, how it starts becoming a trafficker all the way to going into the lorry and then ending up as a slave in the UK, and then the police, who are underfunded, under resourced, and to be honest, they don't actually know enough about the situation in order to bring it down in terms of their intelligence, because that's what they've told me themselves when I've interviewed them. That you get to see the full scale of it, and hopefully at the end of the TV series, you've been entertained, number one, because that's one of my number one principles as a writer director. But then you've also learned like what is taking place in our society right now, because there's not a country on the planet where human trafficking isn't an issue, and I'm talking even in Iceland it exists. So it is in every part of the globe. It's like it's as prevalent as climate change, for example.
you know, I love I love when it comes to a television series, multiple storylines working together. And I think you have something very powerful that you're working on. And I love the title The Long Spring. That's the one I would use.
I'm so glad you said that. And again, I have to give props to my DP, Michael Kinsella Perks, because he was the one that made me change it. I had a different name before. It was a name from Zimbabwe when we were working with an actor from Zimbabwe, Tawanda. And the original name was Monero, the View, in Zimbabwean. But the Long Spring, where I arrived at that after Mikey said you got to change that film name because it's not going to catch on with people, is I started researching the names of traps, and the long spring is one of those like bear traps which goes up and catches you like that. But then also it's got different interpretations of like like spring change and yeah extended timelines.
Well, what I like about the title, especially if it's going to be a series or a film, is that it's it doesn't it doesn't directly tell the audience what it's about. They're going to have to read the byline, the log line, and I just feel that that title works so well because there's actually a slight positivity to it because of the word spring and refugees desiring a better life, um, wanting their lives to grow and blossom. And so when I saw the title, because you know me, I kept you and I were emailing each other back and forth, and I kept saying the last spring, but it's the long spring. But it just works so well. But what I loved about this short film, because you called it a proof of concept, but this is a short film that does not look like a proof of concept, because I can usually spot a proof of concept a mile away. This one does not look like it. It has three a three-part arc in this film, and it just works. But it's just so powerful. I mean, when you after you see it, I mean, I'm not gonna give the ending away, but you know, there's a little light of hope there.
That's great. I mean, really, really great points you make there. I'm glad you like the title so much, and you said a lot of the same things that we thought when we were deciding on what to call it. And yeah, like there has to be hope. Like we have. I think this situation is actually so bad and so bleak when, especially when you're researching the truth of modern slavery, that it's kind of like things can only get better. Like surely from here, because they have been getting worse year on year. So let's hope. Yeah, let's hope.
So you have already been selected to more to more film festivals.
Yeah, we've still got, I think we've got about 20 festivals left. Most of them, I believe, are in the UK. I think Tampere Festival, we're still waiting to hear back on. Um, but now that we're BAFTA qualified, it's kind of just like the more the merrier. We submitted to the BIFAs literally this week, and we'll be submitting to the BAFTAs pretty soon. And yeah, cross your fingers. I think it's got a fighting chance.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, The Long Spring is more than a beautifully crafted short film. It is a deeply human story that gives voice to people whose struggles are too often reduced to headlines. Now, this powerful and compelling film reminds us that behind every refugee is a family, a dream, an unshakable hope for safety. But by confronting the terrifying realities of human smuggling and trafficking, Olly Ginelli challenged the audience to look beyond politics and see the humanity at the heart of this global crisis. The intimate cinematography, extraordinary performances by the actors, and masterful storytelling places us in every anxious moment, allowing the tension to build with heartbreaking authenticity. It's a film that doesn't simply ask us to watch, it asks us to feel, to empathize, and to truly understand what it takes to achieve a better life. And Olly, I want to thank you for sharing this remarkable film and this journey behind the long spring, and much success to you with the BAFTAs and the BIFTA campaigns. And hopefully, we'll see this one make a run for the Oscars as well.
Fingers crossed. Yeah, we could still qualify for the Oscars. And Ward, this was one of the best interviews I've done on our press tour. So thank you so much for having me. Honestly.
Oh, you are absolutely welcome, and it's our goal here at Bond on Cinema to shine the light on the filmmaker and the film itself, and we just kind of throw the clickbait out the window. We just want to get down to what the story is about and the filmmaking process. And again, ladies and gentlemen, if you're attending a film festival and the Long Spring is in the block, you better make sure that you're sitting in the audience. And for all of you who are filmmakers, make sure you're sitting in the audience, because you may actually learn a little bit more by watching this incredible film, because there's so much to see, so much to absorb, so much to learn. Because the greatest thing about the film community is we can all learn from one another to become better filmmakers and better storytellers. So, with that, ladies and gentlemen, you can watch or listen to all of the Bond on Cinema interviews at bondoncinema.com. Check out our Prime show, our YouTube channel. We're on Spotify, iTunes, and more. And remember, you'll either see me at the movies or from the red carpet.